The morning sun painted the rice fields golden as Maria walked hand in hand with her 8-year-old son Diego toward the village cemetery. Black clothes hung heavy on their shoulders, and the weight of sorrow pressed down on them like the humid Philippine air. Today, they would say goodbye to Roberto, Maria's second husband in just 3 years. Diego squeezed his mother's hand tighter as they approached the crowd of villagers. He could feel their stares burning into his back. Whispers followed them like hungry dogs, and even though he was just a child, he understood that something had changed in how people looked at his mother. "2 husbands, both dead," whispered old Lola Carmen, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is not normal. This is not right." Maria kept her eyes forward, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Roberto had been a good man, a kind man who had loved both her and Diego, despite the gossip that had started after her first husband Carlos died in that terrible farming accident. Now Roberto was gone too, taken by a sudden sickness that the village doctor couldn't explain. The priest, Father Antonio, spoke about God's plan and eternal rest, but Maria barely heard the words. All she could think about was how Roberto had smiled that morning just a week ago, how he had promised to teach Diego to fix the old radio after work. Now there would be no more mornings, no more promises, no more laughter echoing through their small house. After the burial, people began to leave quickly. Usually, funerals were followed by long gatherings where families shared food and stories about the person who had passed away. But today was different. Maria watched as her neighbors avoided her eyes, hurrying past without offering the usual words of comfort. Diego tugged on her dress. "Mama, why is everyone leaving so fast?" Before Maria could answer, she heard voices behind her. Roberto's older brother, Mang Ben, was talking to his wife in hushed tones, but not quietly enough. "The house belongs to our family now," he was saying. "Roberto may have lived there, but the land has been in our family for generations. She has no claim to it." Maria's heart sank. She had hoped that Roberto's family would let her and Diego stay, at least until she could figure out what to do next. But she could see the fear in their eyes, too. The same fear she was seeing everywhere. The next few days passed like a bad dream. Maria tried to continue her normal routine, taking Diego to school and going to the market for food. But everything had changed. The woman who sold vegetables, who had always greeted Maria with a warm smile, now looked away when she approached. The price of rice suddenly became more expensive. Children who used to play with Diego now kept their distance. At school, Diego came home with torn clothes and a sad face. "The other kids say you're cursed, Mama," he said, his voice small and confused. "They say you make people die. Is that true?" Maria knelt down and hugged her son tightly. "No, my love. I would never hurt anyone. Sometimes bad things happen, and people look for someone to blame. But it's not your fault, and it's not mine either." But even as she said the words, a tiny voice in the back of her mind wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something wrong with her. How else could she explain losing 2 husbands so young? How else could she make sense of the way her life had turned upside down twice? The whispers grew louder each day. She heard fragments of conversations that stopped suddenly when people noticed her nearby. Words like cursed and bad luck and dangerous floated through the air like smoke, choking her with their weight. One evening, as Maria was cooking dinner over their small fire, her sister Rosa appeared at the door. Maria's heart lifted with hope. Rosa had been her closest friend since childhood, the one person she thought she could always count on. "Rosa, please come in. I've been hoping you would visit." But Rosa didn't step inside. She stood in the doorway, her face torn between love and fear. "Maria, I can't. People are talking. They're saying that anyone who gets close to you might be next. I have my own children to think about." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. If her own sister was afraid of her, then truly there was no one left who would stand by her side. "Please," Maria whispered. "We have nowhere else to go. Mang Ben wants us out of the house by next week." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I can't risk it. You have to understand." After Rosa left, Maria sat in the growing darkness, holding Diego close. He had pretended to be asleep during the conversation, but she could feel his small body tense with worry. The final blow came 3 days later. Maria woke up to find something nailed to her front door. It was a piece of paper with words written in angry, bold letters. "Leave before you bring more death to our village. You are not welcome here anymore." Diego read the note over her shoulder. His reading had improved so much over the past year, and Maria had been so proud of his progress. Now she wished he couldn't understand the cruel words. "What does it mean, Mama?" he asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Maria carefully removed the note and crumpled it in her hands. "It means we need to pack our things, my love. We're going on a journey." "Where will we go?" Maria looked out at the village that had once been her home, at the fields where she had played as a child, at the church where she had been married twice, and where she had prayed for happiness that seemed to slip through her fingers like water. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but we'll figure it out together. We always do." That night, as they packed their few belongings into 2 small bags, Maria tried to stay strong for her son. But inside, her heart was breaking into pieces. She had never felt so alone, so unwanted, so lost. Tomorrow, they would leave the only home Diego had ever known, walking into an uncertain future with no money, no plan, and no one to help them. The curse that people claimed surrounded her felt more real than ever, not because she believed in supernatural powers, but because the fear and hatred of others had the power to destroy lives just as surely as any ancient spell. As she tucked Diego into bed for their last night in the house, she wondered if they would ever find a place where they could belong again. The rooster's crow hadn't even finished echoing through the village when Maria heard the angry voices outside her door. She had barely slept, holding Diego close as they both listened to footsteps gathering in the darkness. Now, as the first rays of sunlight crept through their small window, she could see shadows moving in their yard. "Maria, come out! It's time for you to leave!" The voice belonged to Captain Torres, the village leader who had once praised her cooking at community gatherings. Diego stirred in her arms, his sleepy eyes wide with fear. "Mama, what's happening?" Maria quickly dressed them both, her hands shaking as she tried to button Diego's shirt. Through the thin walls, she could hear more voices joining the crowd. People who had once been her friends, her neighbors, even distant relatives were all there, united in their desire to see her gone. She opened the door slowly, clutching their 2 small bags. The sight that greeted her made her stomach drop. At least 30 people stood in her yard, their faces hard with determination and fear. Some held farming tools, others carried stones. But what hurt most were the familiar faces among them. There was Aling Rosa, the woman who had helped deliver Diego 8 years ago. There was Kuya Jun, who had taught her husband Carlos how to fix engines. Even young Pedro, barely 16, stood with the group, though he kept his eyes on the ground. "Please," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper, "just give us a few more days to find somewhere to go." "No more days!" shouted someone from the back. "You've brought enough bad luck to our village. First Carlos, then Roberto. Who's next? Our children? Our husbands?" Diego pressed closer to his mother's side, and she could feel him trembling. She wanted to pick him up and run, but there was nowhere to go. The crowd surrounded them completely. Captain Torres stepped forward, holding an official-looking paper. "The village council met last night. We all agreed. You must leave today. This morning, before the sun gets higher." "But where can we go?" Maria's voice cracked. We have no money, nowhere to stay. Diego needs to go to school. That's not our problem anymore, said Aling Rosa, though she couldn't quite meet Maria's eyes. You should have thought about that before you brought this curse to our village. As they forced Maria and Diego to walk toward the main road, people came out of their houses to watch. Some children pointed and whispered. A few women made the sign of the cross as they passed. Maria kept her head high, refusing to let them see her cry, but inside her heart was breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. At the edge of the village, Captain Torres stopped. If you try to come back, we'll call the police. You're not welcome here anymore. Maria looked back one last time at the place where she had been born, where she had grown up, where she had fallen in love and gotten married and given birth to her son. The rice fields stretched green and beautiful in the morning light, and for a moment she remembered running through them as a child, carefree and loved. Come on, Mama, Diego said quietly, taking her hand. Let's go. They walked for hours along the dusty road, the sun growing hotter with each step. Diego never complained, though Maria could see he was tired and thirsty. When they reached the next village, Maria felt a spark of hope. Surely here, where no one knew their story, they could find help. But word traveled fast in the countryside. When Maria approached a small store to buy water, the owner took one look at her and shook his head. I heard about you on the radio this morning. The cursed widow from San Miguel. I can't serve you. Bad for business. Village after village, the story was the same. Doors slammed in their faces. Children were pulled inside when they approached. Even at churches where Maria hoped to find sanctuary, priests made excuses about being too busy to help. By the third day, their small amount of money was gone. They had been sleeping under trees and bridges, drinking water from streams when they could find them. Diego's clothes were dirty and torn, and dark circles had appeared under his young eyes. Mama, I'm so hungry, he whispered as they sat by the roadside, watching cars pass without stopping. Maria felt like her heart would break completely. She had failed as a mother. She couldn't protect her son from hunger, from cold, from the cruelty of the world. She looked at his thin face and made a decision that went against everything she believed. Wait here, she told him, walking toward a house where she could see a woman hanging laundry. Please, Maria begged, kneeling in the dirt. I don't care what you think of me, but my son hasn't eaten in 2 days. Just a little rice, a piece of bread, anything. The woman looked at Diego sitting by the road, so small and helpless, and her expression softened slightly. Without saying a word, she went inside and returned with a small bag of crackers and a bottle of water. Don't come back, she said quietly, and don't tell anyone I helped you. That night, as they shared the crackers under a bridge, Diego looked up at his mother with eyes too wise for his age. Mama, why doesn't anyone want us? Maria pulled him close, feeling his ribs through his thin shirt. She had asked herself the same question 1,000 times, but she still had no answer that would make sense to a child. Sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand, she said finally. And when people are afraid, they do mean things. Are we really cursed? Diego asked. Maria was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sound of water flowing under the bridge. I don't know, my love, but even if we are, we still have each other, and that's worth something, isn't it? Diego nodded and snuggled closer. Despite everything, despite the hunger and the fear and the uncertainty, they still had their love for each other. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to in the darkness. As Maria listened to her son's breathing slow into sleep, she stared up at the stars and wondered how much longer they could survive like this. Tomorrow, they would walk again, looking for someone, anyone, who might show them a little kindness. But tonight, under this cold bridge with her hungry child in her arms, she had never felt more alone in the world. 2 weeks had passed since Maria and Diego left their village, and the world had become a cold, unwelcoming place. They had walked so far that Maria's feet bled inside her worn shoes, and Diego had stopped asking when they would find a real home. Now they were in the city, where tall buildings cast long shadows and the noise of traffic never stopped. The city was different from the villages. Here, people were too busy to stare or whisper about curses. But it was also harder to find help. Everyone seemed to be rushing somewhere important, and no one had time for a woman and her child sitting on the sidewalk with empty stomachs. Diego had been coughing for 3 days now, and his forehead felt hot when Maria touched it. She carried him on her back when he got too tired to walk, feeling how light he had become. The little boy who used to run and laugh and climb trees was now quiet and weak, and it scared her more than anything else in the world. "Mama," Diego whispered as they sat outside a big hospital, watching people come and go. "My head hurts really bad." Maria's heart pounded as she felt his burning skin. She had to get help, no matter what it cost. She picked him up and walked through the hospital doors, ignoring the stares from people in the waiting room. "Please," she begged the nurse at the front desk. "My son is very sick. He has a fever and he can't stop coughing." The nurse looked at their dirty clothes and tired faces. "Do you have insurance? Money to pay for treatment?" "No, but please, he's just a child. I'll work to pay you back. I'll do anything." "I'm sorry, but we can only treat emergency cases without payment. You'll need to go to the public clinic across town." Maria felt like screaming. How could anyone look at a sick child and turn them away? But she swallowed her anger and picked up Diego again. The public clinic was far, and Diego was getting heavier with each step. When they finally reached the clinic, there were dozens of people waiting in line. Mothers with crying babies, old people leaning on walking sticks, workers with bandaged hands. Maria joined the line, holding Diego close as he shivered in her arms. Hours passed. The sun went down, and still they waited. Diego's breathing became more difficult, and his cough sounded worse. When they finally saw a doctor, he was tired and rushed. "It's just a fever," he said after a quick examination. "Give him these pills and lots of water. He'll be fine in a few days." But Maria could see that Diego wasn't fine. That night, as they slept in an alley behind a restaurant, Diego's fever got higher. He talked in his sleep, calling for his father, Carlos, saying things that didn't make sense. Maria held him and cried, feeling completely helpless. The next morning, she tried to wake him, but Diego's eyes stayed closed. His breathing was shallow and fast. Panic filled Maria's chest as she shook him gently. "Diego, wake up. Please, baby, wake up." A homeless woman named Lola Carmen had been watching them from across the alley. She was old and bent with kind eyes, in a weathered face. She walked over and touched Diego's forehead. "This child needs a hospital right now," she said firmly. "Not the clinic, a real hospital." "They won't help us without money," Maria sobbed. "Then you carry him there, and you don't leave until they help him. You make noise, you cry, you make them see that this is a child who needs help." Maria picked up Diego's limp body and ran toward the nearest hospital. Her legs felt like they would give out, but she kept running. In the emergency room, she didn't wait for permission. She walked straight to the doctors and laid Diego on an empty bed. "Help him," she said loudly. "Please help my son." The doctors and nurses gathered around Diego, checking his pulse and temperature. Maria stood back, her heart pounding as she watched them work. "He's severely dehydrated and has pneumonia," one doctor said. "We need to admit him immediately." "But we don't have money," Maria said. The doctor looked at Diego's pale face and made a decision. "We'll worry about that later. Right now, this child needs treatment." For the next 3 days, Maria never left Diego's side. She slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair, eating only when the nurses insisted. Slowly, very slowly, Diego began to get better. His fever broke, his breathing improved, and finally, He opened his eyes and smiled at her. "Mama, I had such strange dreams," he said weakly. Maria kissed his forehead, crying with relief. "You're okay now. That's all that matters." But when it was time to leave the hospital, the bill was enormous. More money than Maria could ever hope to earn. The hospital administrator was kind but firm. "You can set up a payment plan, but you'll need to pay something each month. Do you have a job? A place to live?" Maria shook her head. They had nothing except the clothes on their backs and each other. That night, as they sat outside the hospital with nowhere to go, Lola Carmen found them. Again, she had brought them soup in a thermos and a blanket. "I've been on the streets for 5 years," she told them. "I know how hard it is, but I also know how to survive." She led them to a place under a bridge where several other homeless people had made a small community. There was Mang Tony, who collected bottles to sell. Aunt Linda, who had lost her house in a fire. Young Miguel, who had aged out of an orphanage with nowhere to go. "We take care of each other here," Lola Carmen explained. "We share what we have. It's not much, but it's something." For the first time in weeks, Maria felt a tiny bit of hope. These people had also been rejected by society, but they hadn't rejected each other. They made room for Maria and Diego, sharing their small fire and their meager food. But just as Maria began to feel safe, tragedy struck again. Mang Tony, the kind man who had shared his blanket with Diego, became sick. He died quietly in his sleep, and by morning, word had spread among the homeless community. "It's her," someone whispered, pointing at Maria. "The cursed woman. She brought death here too." Even among the outcasts, even among people who had nothing left to lose, the fear of Maria's supposed curse was stronger than their compassion. One by one, they moved away from her and Diego, leaving them alone again. Lola Carmen was the only one who stayed. "Nonsense," she said firmly. "Mang Tony was old and sick. Death comes to everyone eventually." But Maria could see the doubt even in Lola Carmen's eyes. As she held Diego close that night, listening to the sounds of the city around them, Maria wondered if maybe the villagers had been right. Maybe she really was cursed. Maybe everyone who got close to her was doomed. She looked down at Diego, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt a terrible thought creep into her mind. What if the only way to save her son was to leave him? What if her love for him was the very thing that would destroy him? The thought was so painful that she pushed it away immediately, but it stayed there, lurking in the darkness of her mind, whispering that maybe, just maybe, everyone would be better off without her. The rain had been falling for 2 days straight, turning the streets into rivers and making life even harder for those who had nowhere to go. Maria and Diego huddled under a piece of cardboard behind an old building, trying to stay dry. Diego's cough had come back, and Maria could feel her own strength fading. They hadn't eaten anything except a few scraps from a garbage bin in over a day. "Mama, I'm so cold," Diego whispered, pressing closer to her side. Maria wrapped her thin arms around him, trying to share what little warmth she had left. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be warm, to be full, to be wanted somewhere. The memories seemed like they belonged to someone else now. That's when she heard footsteps splashing through the puddles. Maria looked up to see a woman walking toward them, carrying a large umbrella and wearing a bright yellow raincoat. Most people walked faster when they saw homeless people, but this woman was walking straight toward them. "Hello," the woman said gently, crouching down so she was at their level. "I'm Isabel. I work with people who need help. Are you okay?" Maria stared at her, not sure if this was real or if hunger was making her imagine things. Isabel had kind eyes and a warm smile, and she didn't look afraid or disgusted like most people did. "We're fine," Maria said automatically, the lie coming easily after weeks of practice. Isabel tilted her head and looked at Diego, who was shivering despite being pressed against his mother. This little one doesn't look fine to me. When did you last have a hot meal? Something in Isabel's voice broke through Maria's defenses. Maybe it was the gentleness. Or maybe it was just that she was too tired to keep pretending. I don't remember, she whispered. Come with me, Isabel said, standing up and extending her hand. I know a place where you can get warm and get some food. Maria hesitated. She had learned not to trust easy kindness. Too many times people had seemed helpful only to turn cruel when they learned about her supposed curse. I know you're scared, Isabel said quietly. But I'm here to help, not to hurt you. That's my job. Diego looked up at his mother with hopeful eyes. Please, Mama. I'm so hungry. Maria took Isabel's hand and let her help them both to their feet. Isabel's car was parked nearby, warm and dry inside. As they drove through the city, Isabel asked gentle questions. What were their names? Where had they come from? How long had they been on the streets? Maria answered carefully, leaving out the parts about curses and dead husbands. But Isabel seemed to sense there was more to their story. Whatever brought you here, Isabel said, you don't have to face it alone anymore. The shelter where Isabel worked was unlike anything Maria had expected. It was clean and bright, with painted murals on the walls and the smell of cooking food in the air. Other families were there too, mothers with children, old people, young men who looked lost and tired. This is our family center, Isabel explained, as she led them to a table. We help people get back on their feet no matter what their situation is. A volunteer brought them hot soup and fresh bread. Diego's eyes lit up as he tasted the first warm food he'd had in days. Maria ate slowly, still not quite believing this was real. After they ate, Isabel took them to a small room with 2 beds, clean sheets, and a window that looked out at a garden. You can stay here while we figure out a more permanent solution, she said. That night, as Diego slept peacefully in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling. She waited for something bad to happen, for Isabel to change her mind, for the other families to discover who she was and demand that she leave. But nothing bad happened. The next morning, Isabel brought them breakfast and sat down to talk with Maria properly. I've been doing this work for 10 years, Isabel said. I've heard every story you can imagine. Nothing you tell me will shock me or make me want to help you less. Slowly, carefully, Maria began to tell her story. About Carlos and Roberto dying, about the village believing she was cursed, about being forced to leave with nothing, about Diego getting sick and nearly dying. Isabel listened without judgment, nodding and asking questions that showed she really cared about understanding their situation. You know what I think? Isabel said when Maria finished. I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You've kept yourself and your son alive through impossible circumstances. That's not a curse, that's courage. Over the next few days, Isabel introduced Maria to other people at the center. There was Dr. Carmen, who examined Diego and declared him healthy but undernourished. There was Teacher Rosa, who began working with Diego to help him catch up on the schooling he'd missed. There was Counselor Anna, who helped Maria talk through the guilt and fear she'd been carrying. Losing people you love is terrible, Anna told her during one of their sessions. But it's not your fault. Bad things happen to good people all the time. That doesn't make you cursed. For the first time in months, Maria began to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life again. Diego was gaining weight and laughing more. He made friends with other children at the center and started talking about what he wanted to be when he grew up. But the biggest change came when Isabel sat down with Maria one evening with a folder full of papers. I've been making some calls, Isabel said. I have a friend who works with an organization that helps people start over in other countries. There's a program for families like yours. Maria's heart started beating faster. What kind of program? It would mean leaving the Philippines, Isabel said carefully, moving to a place where no one knows your story, where you and Diego could have a fresh start. There are people there who would help you learn the language, find work, get Diego into school. Maria stared at the papers, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. But why would anyone want to help us? We have nothing to offer. Isabel smiled. You have everything to offer. You're a mother who loves her son. You're a survivor. You're someone who deserves a chance at happiness. That night, Maria talked to Diego about the possibility of moving to a new country. His eyes grew wide with excitement. Would there be other kids there who would want to play with me? He asked. Yes, Maria said, smoothing his hair. Kids who won't care about silly stories or old superstitions. And you won't be sad anymore? Maria's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how much her sadness had affected him. I think I could learn to be happy again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and interviews and medical checkups. Isabel guided them through every step, explaining things they didn't understand and advocating for them when the process got complicated. Why are you doing all this for us? Maria asked one day. Isabel paused in her work and looked at Maria seriously. Because everyone deserves a chance to be happy, because what happened to you was wrong, and because I believe that when we help each other, we make the world a little bit better. As they waited for the final approval for their new life, Maria found herself changing. The constant fear was slowly being replaced by something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. For the first time since Roberto's death, she could imagine a future where she and Diego were not just surviving, but actually living. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Isabel's face was glowing as she hung up the phone. Pack your bags, she said with a huge smile. You're going to Canada. Maria's hands shook as she held the airplane tickets. After months of living on the streets, after being rejected by everyone she had ever known, she was holding 2 pieces of paper that represented a completely new life. Diego pressed his face against the car window as Isabel drove them to the airport, watching the city that had been both cruel and kind to them disappear behind them. Are you scared, Mama? Diego asked, taking her hand. Maria thought about the question. Yes, she was scared. But it was a different kind of fear than what she had felt for so long. This wasn't the fear of not knowing where their next meal would come from or where they would sleep that night. This was the fear that comes with hope, the fear that maybe this dream was too good to be true. A little, she admitted. But I'm excited too, aren't you? Diego nodded enthusiastically. I want to see snow. Teacher Rosa showed me pictures of snow in Canada. It looks like magic. At the airport, Isabel helped them check in and walked with them as far as she was allowed to go. When it was time to say goodbye, Maria found herself crying. I don't know how to thank you, she said, hugging the woman who had saved their lives. You don't need to thank me, Isabel replied. Just be happy. That's all the thanks I need. The airplane was the biggest machine Diego had ever seen. As they took off, he stared out the window in wonder, watching the Philippines grow smaller and smaller. Below them, Maria closed her eyes and said a silent prayer of gratitude to Isabel, to Dr. Carmen, to Teacher Rosa, to everyone who had helped them when they needed it most. The flight to Canada took many hours, with stops in other countries along the way. Diego slept curled up against his mother's side, while Maria stared out at the clouds and tried to imagine what their new life would be like. When they finally landed in Toronto, the cold air hit them like a wall. Neither of them had ever experienced weather so different from the tropical Philippines. But waiting for them at the airport was a Filipino family, Tito Ben and Tita Lucy, who had volunteered to sponsor them and help them get settled. Welcome to Canada, Tita Lucy said in Tagalog, wrapping them both in warm coats she had brought. We're so happy you're here. Tito Ben and Tita Lucy had immigrated to Canada 15 years earlier and had built a good life for themselves. They owned a small restaurant and lived in a house with extra bedrooms that they often used to help new immigrants. "We know how hard it is to start over in a new country," Tito Ben explained as they drove through the snowy streets. "We want to help you the same way others helped us when we first arrived." Their house was warm and welcoming, with pictures of family and Filipino decorations that made Maria feel a little less homesick. That first night, as Diego marveled at his first glimpse of snow falling outside his bedroom window, Maria sat with Tita Lucy in the kitchen. "Isabel told us a little bit about what you've been through," Tita Lucy said gently. "But here, no one needs to know your story unless you want to tell them. Here, you can be whoever you want to be." The first few months were challenging in ways Maria hadn't expected. Learning English was harder than she had imagined, especially trying to understand all the different accents and expressions people used. Everything was expensive, and the cold weather seemed to go on forever. But there were good surprises, too. Diego adapted quickly, making friends at school and learning English faster than his mother. The other parents at his school were kind and welcoming. When they learned that Maria was a single mother trying to build a new life, several of them offered to help with rides to school or babysitting when she had job interviews. Maria started working at Tito Ben and Tita Lucy's restaurant, learning to cook Canadian dishes alongside familiar Filipino food. The work was hard, but she felt proud to be earning money again, to be contributing something useful. "You're a natural in the kitchen," Tita Lucy told her after a busy Saturday night. "Maybe someday you could open your own restaurant." The idea seemed impossible, but Maria found herself thinking about it. For the first time in so long, she was thinking about the future instead of just trying to survive the present. As winter turned to spring, Maria enrolled in English classes at the local community center. She met other immigrants from all over the world, people from Somalia, Syria, Mexico, Vietnam. All of them had their own stories of loss and hope, of leaving everything behind to build something new. "We're all brave," said Fatima, a woman from Somalia who sat next to Maria in class. "It takes courage to start over." Diego continued to thrive. He joined the school soccer team and discovered he had a talent for math. His teacher, Mrs. Johnson, called Maria in for a conference to tell her how well Diego was doing. "He's a special boy," Mrs. Johnson said. "Very smart, very kind to the other children. You should be very proud of him." Maria was proud, but more than that, she was grateful. Grateful that Diego was laughing again, making friends, dreaming about his future. He wanted to be a doctor now, he told her. He wanted to help sick children the way the doctors had helped him. A year after they arrived in Canada, Maria received an unexpected phone call. It was a journalist from the Philippines who had heard their story through Isabel. He wanted to write an article about their journey, about how they had overcome the superstitions that had driven them from their home. At first, Maria was hesitant. She had worked so hard to leave that painful past behind. But then she thought about other women who might be facing similar situations, who might be told they were cursed or bad luck. "If telling our story can help even one person," she told Diego, "then maybe it's worth it." The article was published in several newspapers, and soon Maria was receiving messages from people all over the Philippines. Some were supportive, praising her strength and criticizing the villagers who had treated her so badly. Others were from women who had faced similar accusations, thanking her for speaking out. But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source: her sister Rosa. "I'm sorry," Rosa's letter said. "I was afraid, and I let fear make me cruel. I should have helped you. I should have protected you and Diego. I hope someday you can forgive me." Maria read the letter several times, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. She wrote back, telling Rosa that she forgave her, that fear makes people do things they later regret. 2 years after arriving in Canada, Maria had saved enough money to rent their own small apartment. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms and a tiny kitchen. But it was theirs. Diego helped her paint the walls and arrange their few pieces of furniture. "Do you miss the Philippines?" Diego asked one evening as they sat at their small dinner table. Maria thought about the question carefully. "I miss the good parts," she said. "I miss the warm weather and the beautiful rice fields. I miss your Lola and Lolo, and I hope we can visit them someday. But I don't miss being afraid all the time." "I'm glad we came here," Diego said. "I like our life now." Maria looked around their small apartment, at Diego doing his homework at the kitchen table, at the pictures they had put up on the walls showing their new life in Canada. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was a good life, a life where they were wanted and welcomed, where Diego could dream big dreams and work to achieve them. That night, as she tucked Diego into bed, he asked her the question he used to ask when they were homeless and hungry. "Mama, do you think we're cursed?" Maria smiled and kissed his forehead. "No, my love. I think we're blessed. It just took us a while to find our blessing." As she turned off the lights and listened to Diego's peaceful breathing, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years: complete contentment. They had traveled so far from that small village where people had feared her. They had survived hunger, cold, loneliness, and despair. And now, finally, they had found a place where they belonged. Tomorrow, Diego would go to school and come home, excited about what he had learned. Maria would go to work at the restaurant, saving money and planning for the future. They would live their quiet, ordinary, wonderful life, proving every day that there had never been any curse at all, only fear and the power of love to overcome it.